They say you never truly know the people in your life until you stop being an asset to them and start becoming a liability. I learned that lesson in a cold, sterile doctor's office in Birmingham, Alabama, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. My name is Bonnie Garrison. I am 68 years old, and up until that Tuesday, I thought I had a family that loved me for who I was, not for what I owned. I was wrong. I was sitting on that crinkly paper on the exam table, clutching my handbag like it was a life raft. Dr. Evans, a man I have known for 20 years, looked over his glasses at me. He didn't have to say the words. I could read the pity in his eyes. The diagnosis was an aggressive autoimmune condition. It wasn't a death sentence, not immediately, but it was going to change everything. It meant expensive treatments, specialists, and, worst of all, a loss of strength. It meant I wouldn't be able to manage my big colonial house on my own much longer. The drive home was a blur. I didn't cry. I was too busy calculating. I was thinking about my savings. I was thinking about the stairs in my house. But mostly, I was thinking about my son, Christopher. He was my only child. I raised him on my own after his father passed. We were a team, and now I needed my teammate. I needed to know that I wasn't going to face this terrifying new reality alone. I called him from the car and asked him and his wife, Jean, to come over that evening. I told them it was important. When they arrived, the house was warm. I had brewed a fresh pot of coffee and set out a store-bought coffee cake on the counter. I wanted things to feel normal. I wanted to soften the blow. We sat in the living room, the same room where Christopher learned to walk, the same room where we opened Christmas presents every year. I sat in my favorite wingback chair, my hands trembling in my lap. I have some bad news, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I told them everything. I explained the diagnosis. I explained that I would need treatments that would leave me exhausted. I explained that my immune system was compromising itself and that my life, as I knew it, was going to slow down drastically. I waited. In my head, I had rehearsed this moment a dozen times on the drive home. I imagined Christopher rushing to hug me. I imagined Jean, my daughter-in-law of 10 years, grabbing my hand and telling me they would handle the groceries, the cleaning, the appointments. I expected love. I expected fear. For me. Instead, there was silence. A thick, heavy silence that hung in the air like smoke. Christopher looked at the floor, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't look at me. He looked at his shoes. But it was Jean's reaction that made my blood run cold. She didn't gasp. She didn't tear up. She sat up straighter. Her eyes didn't meet mine. They darted around the room. She looked at the antique clock on the mantel. She looked at the hardwood floors. She looked at the crown molding. So, Jean said, her voice sharp and devoid of any warmth, what does this mean for the long term? I mean, are you going to need full-time care? Nursing homes are incredibly expensive, Bonnie. They can wipe out a person's entire savings in a year. I blinked, stunned. Well, I hope it doesn't come to that, Jean. Dr. Evans thinks that with medication and rest. But what if it does? Jean interrupted, leaning forward. We have to be realistic. If you get sick enough to need a facility, the state comes for your assets. They take the house to pay the bills. Have you thought about what happens to the house? The house. Not, how are you feeling, Mom? Not, are you in pain? Just the house. I felt a cold prickle of fear start at the base of my neck. It wasn't the fear of the illness anymore. It was a new fear, a primal fear. I looked at Christopher, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, to tell his wife to stop talking about real estate and start acting like a human being. Jean's right, Mom. Christopher mumbled, still not looking me in the eye. We have to be practical. You're not going to be able to keep this place up. The yard alone is too much work. And if you rack up huge medical bills. We don't want to see everything you worked for disappear. Everything I worked for. I asked, my voice trembling. I am sitting right here, Christopher. I am the one who is sick. I am not gone yet. We know, Jean said dismissively, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. But you need to protect the estate. For the family. For the family. That phrase usually means love and support. In that moment, it sounded like a business transaction. I needed a moment. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I need some water, I said, pushing myself up from the chair. My legs felt heavy, heavier than they had in the doctor's office. I'll get it, Christopher said, starting to rise. No, I said firmly. I can get my own water. I'm not an invalid yet. I walked to the kitchen. My steps were slow on the tile floor. I filled a glass at the sink, staring out the window into the dark backyard. My heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what was happening. I felt like I had walked into a meeting with a bank loan officer, not a conversation with my family. The living room is connected to the kitchen by a short hallway, and sound travels well in my old house. I turned off the tap and stood there, gripping the cold glass of water. She looks terrible. Jean's voice drifted into the kitchen. It was a hushed whisper, urgent and aggressive. She's sick, Jean. Give her a break, Christopher whispered back, though his voice lacked conviction. I am giving her a break. Jean hissed. I'm trying to save us from a financial disaster. Christopher, wake up. If she needs specialized treatment or ends up in a home, the medical bills will be astronomical. They will put a lien on this house. We will lose everything. I froze. I stopped breathing. We need to get the assets in our name. Jean continued, her voice low and hard. We need to do it now before the diagnosis is fully on record with the insurance companies, before she starts racking up debt. We need to get the deed transferred. If the house is in our name, the creditors can't touch it when the bills start piling up. We have to secure the inheritance before she drains it. Before she drains it. The glass in my hand shook so hard water sloshed over the rim and onto my hand. I wasn't their mother anymore. I wasn't the woman who paid for Christopher's college. I wasn't the grandmother to the children they kept promising to have, but never did. I was an expiring asset. I was a liability. To them, my illness wasn't a tragedy. It was a financial risk they needed to mitigate. They weren't worried about my health. They were worried about their inheritance. I stood there in the dark kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound beside the blood rushing in my ears. A profound sense of loneliness washed over me, colder than the diagnosis I had received hours earlier. When you are sick, you expect the world to be scary. You don't expect the monster to be sitting on your own sofa, eating your coffee cake, and plotting how to strip you of your property while you are still breathing. I wiped my hand on my apron and took a deep breath. I knew, in that terrifying moment, that if I showed weakness, they would eat me alive. If I cried, they would use it as proof that I was incompetent. If I begged for help, they would use it as leverage to take control. I walked back into the living room. Jean stopped talking immediately and put on a fake, tight smile. Christopher looked guilty. Here's the water, I said. My voice was steady. Too steady. I sat back down in my chair. I looked at Jean. I really looked at her. I saw the calculation in her eyes. I saw the greed masquerading as concern. And I looked at my son, the boy I adored. And I saw a weak man being led by a woman who had already spent my money in her head. They thought they were looking at a helpless old woman who was about to fade away. They had no idea that in that kitchen, the mother in me had gone into hibernation, and something else, something much sharper, had just woken up. So, I said, taking a sip of water and looking Jean dead in the eye, tell me more about this plan to protect the house. Jean's eyes lit up. She thought she had won. She thought I was rolling over. She had no idea. The treatments started 2 weeks after the diagnosis. The doctor warned me that I would feel tired, but tired is a gentle word for what actually happened. It felt like my batteries had been removed. Simple things, like walking from the bedroom to the kitchen to make toast, felt like climbing a mountain. I spent most of my days in my recliner in the living room, covered in a knitted afghan, drifting in and out of sleep. This weakness was what Christopher and Jean were waiting for. It was their entry point. At first, they called it helping. Christopher came over on a Thursday evening while I was resting. He didn't ask how I was feeling. Instead, he walked straight to the small desk in the hallway where I kept my bills and correspondence. "Mom," he said, his voice casual. "Jean and I were talking. You don't need to be worrying about writing checks and licking stamps right now. Your hands are shaking and you need to focus on getting better. I'm going to take the checkbook and the bill pile to our house. We'll handle the utilities and the insurance from there." I remember trying to sit up. A flare of panic rose in my chest. That checkbook was my autonomy. It was how I paid the gardener, the church donation, the grocery delivery. "Christopher, I can still write a check. I'm sick, not incompetent." He sighed, the kind of sigh a parent gives a stubborn toddler. "Mom, don't be difficult. We are trying to help you. Do you really want to stress about the light bill when you're fighting this illness? Just give me the book. It's for safekeeping." For safekeeping. He didn't wait for me to agree. He opened the drawer, took the blue vinyl checkbook, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Just like that, my financial independence walked out the door. I was too weak to fight him, physically, so I let it happen. I told myself he was right. I told myself I was being paranoid. He was my son. He wouldn't steal from me. But the checkbook was just the beginning. The real invasion started 3 days later with Jean. She arrived on a Saturday morning with a box of heavy-duty black trash bags. She didn't knock. She just used the spare key Christopher had given her without asking me. I was drinking tea, trying to muster the energy to read the newspaper. "Good morning, Bonnie," she said, breezy and loud. She didn't look at me. She was looking at my bookshelves. "Christopher, and I decided that this house is too cluttered. It's dusty, and dust is bad for your immune system. We need to purge." "Purge?" I asked, setting my cup down. "Jean, I like my things. They aren't clutter. They are my memories." "It's junk, Bonnie," she said, snapping a trash bag open. The sound was like a whip crack in the quiet room. "It's just stuff. And if you're going to be recovering here, we need space for medical equipment if it comes to that. We need to streamline." She started in the den. I could hear her moving things around. The scrape of furniture, the thud of objects hitting the bottom of a plastic bag. I forced myself to stand up and walk to the doorway. She was clearing off the mantel. In her hand, she held a small, chipped ceramic bluebird. My mother had given me that bluebird when I was 10 years old. It was worthless to anyone else, probably worth 50 cents at a garage sale. But to me, it was my mother. "Jean, stop," I said, leaning against the doorframe for support. "Please don't throw that away. That was my mother's." Jean paused, holding the bird over the open bag. She looked at it with disdain. "Bonnie, it's chipped. It's glued together at the wing. It looks tacky. We're trying to create a clean, serene environment for you. You don't need broken trinkets gathering dust." She dropped it. I watched it fall. It didn't break because the bag was already full of my old magazines and letters, but the message was clear. My history was trash to her. "Please take it out," I whispered. "I'll put the bag in the garage for now," she said, lying. I knew she was lying. I knew that bag was going to the curb the second she left. "Why don't you go back to your chair? You look pale. Let me handle this." You shouldn't be agitated. She ushered me back to the living room like I was a confused guest in my own home. I sat down, trembling not from the illness, but from a rage that was slowly starting to boil under my skin. She spent the next 4 hours stripping my home of its personality. The throw pillows I embroidered, gone. The stack of Reader's Digests I was saving, gone. The photos of my late husband that sat on the side table, she moved them all into a drawer, replacing them with a generic vase she had brought from her car. There, she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. Doesn't that feel more open? More modern? It didn't feel open. It felt sterile. It felt like a hospital waiting room. It felt like nobody lived here anymore. But the final straw, the moment that truly woke me up, happened an hour later. Christopher had joined her, and they were standing in the dining room. I was in the living room just 10 feet away, but they were talking as if I wasn't there. Or worse, as if I was already dead. Jean pulled a metal tape measure from her purse. The metallic zip-snap sound grated on my nerves. She stretched it across the large bay window that looked out over the garden. "These drapes are hideous," Jean said to Christopher. "Heavy, dark velvet. We need to rip these down. I'm thinking plantation shutters. They add value to the property." "Shutters are expensive, babe," Christopher said, looking at his phone. "It's an investment, Chris," she corrected him. "Think about the resale value. And this wall here." She walked over to the wall, separating the dining room from the kitchen. She tapped on it with her knuckle. "I'm pretty sure this isn't load-bearing. If we knock this down, we could open the whole floor plan up. Open concept kitchens are what buyers want right now. It would add at least $20,000 to the asking price." I sat in my chair, my hands gripping the armrests so hard my knuckles turned white. Resale value, asking price, buyers. They weren't cleaning for my health. They weren't decluttering for my immune system. They were staging the house. They were preparing my home for the market. I realized then that they didn't expect me to survive this illness. Or perhaps they were planning to put me in a home, regardless of my recovery, just to get their hands on the sale proceeds. They were measuring my windows for curtains I would never see. They were planning to knock down walls that had held up my roof for 40 years. I looked at Christopher. He wasn't stopping her. He was nodding. He was agreeing. "Yeah, an island would look good there," he said. Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I took a deep, shaky breath. The sadness that had been weighing me down since the diagnosis suddenly evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a confused old woman who would just fade away into the background while they remodeled her life. They thought they had already won. I stopped looking at the empty spot on the mantel where my bluebird used to be. I started looking at them. I watched Jean write down measurements in a notebook. I watched Christopher check his watch, clearly bored. I realized this was a hostile takeover. And you don't win a hostile takeover by crying. You win by outsmarting the opposition. "Christopher," I called out. My voice was stronger than it had been all day. They both jumped. They had forgotten I was in the room. "Yes, Mom," he asked, stepping into the living room. "I'm tired." I lied. "I think I'll take a nap. You two should go home. You've done enough, helping for one day." Jean smiled, a tight, victorious smile. "Of course, Bonnie. We'll get out of your hair. We'll take these trash bags with us." "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for showing me exactly what needed to be done." They missed the double meaning. They took the bags, including my bluebird, and left. I heard their car pull away. I didn't nap. I got up, walked to the kitchen, and pulled the phone book out of the drawer. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I turned the pages until I found the number for Charles, my attorney. He had been my husband's friend, and he was the only person left in this town I could trust. Jean wanted to measure the windows. Fine. Christopher wanted to hold the checkbook. Fine. Let them measure. Let them plan. Let them think they were in charge. I was about to change the locks on the entire game. Sunday dinner used to be the highlight of my week. I would spend hours in the kitchen, roasting a chicken, mashing potatoes with plenty of butter, and waiting for the sound of Christopher's car in the driveway. It was a time of laughter and catching up. But the Sunday after the decluttering incident, the air in my dining room was so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. Christopher and Jean insisted on bringing the food this time. "You rest, Mom," they said, but it didn't feel like a kindness. It felt like they were serving me my last meal. They brought takeout, cold lasagna in foil containers, and sat across from me like a panel of judges rather than family. I picked at the pasta, my appetite gone. I could feel their eyes on me. I knew the conversation that was coming. I had spent the last few days quietly observing them, noticing how they whispered in the corners, how they stopped talking whenever I entered the room. I knew they were planning their final push. Christopher cleared his throat, wiping his mouth with a paper napkin. He didn't look at me. He looked at a spot on the wall just above my head. "Mom," he started, his voice adopting that condescending tone he used when explaining how to use a smartphone. "Jean and I have been doing a lot of research. We've been up late reading about the Medicaid look-back period and asset recovery." I put my fork down. "Christopher, I am not on Medicaid. I have my insurance. I have my savings." "For now," Jean interjected, leaning forward. Her eyes were wide, feigning deep concern. "But Bonnie, with your diagnosis, things can deteriorate fast. If you need to go into a facility next year, and you still own this house, the state will seize it. They will take everything to pay back the care costs. Do you want the government to take your home? Or do you want it to stay in the family?" It was a classic scare tactic. I knew enough to know it wasn't that simple, but they were counting on my fear. They were counting on the fact that most people my age are terrified of losing their legacy to the government. "I plan to stay in my home," I said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." Jean sighed, a loud, exaggerated sound of frustration. She looked at Christopher, then back at me, her expression shifting into something pitying. "Bonnie, are you sure you're thinking clearly? Yesterday, I came by, and the back door was unlocked, wide open. Anyone could have walked in." I frowned. "I locked that door, Jean. I always lock the door." "You didn't," she said firmly. "And last week, you left the stove on after making tea. Christopher had to turn it off. We're worried, Bonnie. We think the illness, or maybe the medication, is affecting your memory. You're becoming confused." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew I hadn't left the stove on. I was meticulous about my kitchen, but hearing her say it with such absolute certainty made my stomach turn. This wasn't just greed anymore. This was gaslighting. They were trying to make me doubt my own sanity so I would surrender control. They wanted me to believe I was already too broken to manage my own life. I looked at Christopher. "Do you believe that? Do you think I'm losing my mind?" He finally looked at me, and I saw the shame in his eyes, but he buried it quickly. "I think you're under a lot of stress, Mom. And stress makes people make mistakes. We just want to protect you from yourself." He reached under the table and pulled out a manila envelope. He slid it across the tablecloth, pushing aside the cold lasagna. "This is a quitclaim deed," he said, "and a power of attorney. If you sign the house over to us now, we can protect it. It becomes our asset, not yours. The state can't touch it. We'll let you live here as long as you can, of course. Nothing changes for you, except the paperwork." I looked at the document. It was already typed up. They must have gone to an online legal site or a cheap paralegal. It was ready for a signature. And the power of attorney? I asked. Just in case, Jean said quickly. So we can handle your bank accounts without you having to go to the branch. It's for your convenience. For my convenience. They wanted the house and the keys to the vault. I looked at their faces. Jean was eager, practically vibrating with anticipation. Christopher looked impatient, like he just wanted this transaction over with so he could go watch the football game. I had a choice in that moment. I could scream. I could throw them out. I could tear the papers up and tell them to never come back. But if I did that, they would just fight harder. They would petition the court for guardianship. They would claim I was incompetent. Jean had already planted the seeds with the unlocked door, and the stove lies. If they dragged me to court, I might lose everything, and I would lose my dignity in the process. No, I couldn't fight them with force. I had to fight them with gravity. I had to let them fall into the hole they were digging. I let my shoulders slump. I let my hand tremble as I reached for my water glass. I made my voice sound small, frail, the voice of the woman they wanted me to be. I don't know, I stammered, looking down at the table. It's all so much. I'm just so tired, Christopher. I can't keep track of everything anymore. Jean's eyes lit up. She reached out and patted my hand. Her skin felt cold. That's exactly why we're here, Bonnie. Let us carry the burden. You just focus on resting. Just sign the papers, and we'll take care of everything. You trust us, don't you? I need to think, I whispered. Leave the papers. I need to sleep on it. My head is spinning. Mom, we really should get this done today, Christopher pressed. Let her sleep on it, Chris, Jean said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She knew she had me. She didn't want to push too hard and snap the line. We'll come back tomorrow morning with a notary. Okay, Bonnie? Okay, I whispered. They left 10 minutes later. They practically skipped to the car. They thought they had broken me. They thought the confused old lady was ready to surrender. The moment the front door clicked shut, I stood up. I walked to the window and watched their car disappear down the street. I wasn't trembling anymore. My spine was straight. I walked to my bedroom, locked the door, and pulled my old address book from the nightstand. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Charles, I said when he answered. It's Bonnie Garrison. Bonnie, he said, his voice warm and familiar. I heard about the diagnosis. I am so sorry. Save the sympathy, Charles. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I don't have much time. I told him everything. I told him about the decluttering, the lies about the stove, the pressure, the quitclaim deed sitting on my dining room table. Bonnie, do not sign that deed, Charles said, his voice rising in alarm. If you sign a quitclaim, you are giving away your biggest asset with zero protection. You are handing them your leverage. I know, I said calmly. That's the plan. What? Charles, do you remember 5 years ago when I took out that home equity line of credit to help my sister pay for her surgery? And then I pulled the rest of the equity out to put into that protected annuity you set up for me. Yes, I remember. You have a lien on the house for nearly $450,000. The house is essentially fully mortgaged. Exactly, I said. And does my son know that? He shouldn't. That's private financial information. Good, I said. And what happens, Charles, if I transfer the title of the house to someone else without the bank's permission? What happens to that loan? There was a silence on the line. Then I heard Charles let out a low whistle. The due on sale clause. If the deed transfers, the bank calls the loan. The entire $450,000 becomes due immediately. The new owners, if they accept the quitclaim, inherit the property encumbered by the debt. If they can't pay it, the bank forecloses. Christopher and Jean want the house, I said, staring at the wallpaper. They want it so badly. They are willing to declare me incompetent to get it. So, I'm going to give it to them. I'm going to sign their quitclaim deed tomorrow. Bonnie, this is nuclear. Charles warned. If you do this, they will be financially ruined. They can't pay that loan. They'll lose the house. And since they are accepting the asset, they'll be stuck dealing with the bank's lawyers. They told me they wanted to take care of everything. I said, my voice hard as flint. They said they wanted the assets. They never asked about the debts. They were so busy measuring the curtains, they forgot to check the foundation. Are you sure? Charles asked. Once you sign, there is no going back. I'm sure, I said. Structure, the transfer of the annuity, so it's untouchable. But let them have the house. Let them have the deed. Do not warn them. If they are smart enough to steal my house, they should be smart enough to do a title search. If they don't, well, that's an expensive lesson. I hung up the phone. I walked back to the dining room and looked at the quitclaim deed. I picked up a pen. I wasn't signing it yet, but I practiced the motion in the air. They wanted to play games with my life. Fine. I was about to make a move they would never see coming. Monday morning arrived with a gray, heavy sky that matched the knot in my stomach. I had barely slept, not because I was afraid, but because I was rehearsing. I had to get this performance exactly right. If I showed even a hint of the anger burning inside me, or if I seemed too sharp, Jean would get suspicious. She would pause. She would dig. And if she dug, she would find the landmine I had buried under the foundation of this house. I dressed carefully. I chose a soft, faded cardigan and a pair of comfortable slacks. I didn't put on makeup. I wanted to look tired. I wanted to look like a woman who had given up the fight. At 9 a.m. sharp, a car door slammed in the driveway. I watched from the living room window. Christopher and Jean were walking up the path, and they had a stranger with them, a woman with a notary bag. They were trying to bypass the system. They were bringing their own notary to my dining room table to get the deed signed, sealed, and delivered before anyone could ask questions. They wanted to avoid my lawyer. They wanted to avoid the courts. They wanted a quick, dirty transfer. I sat in my chair and waited for the key to turn in the lock. Mom, Christopher called out as they entered. His voice was too loud, too cheerful. We're here, and we brought breakfast. Jean marched in, holding a folder like it was a royal decree. The notary, a quiet woman who looked like she just wanted to get paid and leave, trailed behind them. Good morning, Bonnie, Jean said, setting the folder on the dining table. This is Brenda. She's going to notarize the papers for us, so we don't have to drag you out to an office. We're trying to make this as easy as possible for you. That's thoughtful, I said, keeping my voice low and trembling slightly. I stood up slowly, using the armrest for support. Let's get this done while the coffee is hot, Jean said, uncapping a pen. She was practically vibrating. She pulled out the document, the quitclaim deed. Just a moment, a deep voice said from the kitchen doorway. Jean spun around, her eyes widening. Christopher dropped the bag of bagels he was holding. Charles, my attorney and friend of 40 years, stepped into the room. He was wearing his suit, looking calm and imposing. I had let him in through the back door 10 minutes earlier. Who is this? Jean snapped, her polite mask slipping instantly. This is my lawyer, I said softly. I thought he should be here, since this is a legal matter. We don't need lawyers, Bonnie, Jean said, her voice rising. She glared at Christopher. I told you this was a family matter. Lawyers just complicate things and charge fees. We are doing this to protect the house, remember? I am just here to witness, Charles said, walking over to the table. He picked up the document Jean had laid out. He scanned it his face unreadable. A quitclaim deed. Interesting choice. It's the fastest way, Christopher said defensively. We looked it up. It transfers ownership immediately. No closing costs, no title search, no waiting. That is correct, Charles said, looking at Christopher over his glasses. A quitclaim deed transfers the property as is. It transfers the grantor's interest in the property to the grantee. Whatever interest and whatever burdens that may be. Jean snatched the paper back. We know what it means. It means the house becomes ours, and the state can't take it when Bonnie gets sicker. It's standard. Can we just sign, please? Brenda has another appointment. I looked at Jean. She was so hungry for this house. She saw the granite countertops I had installed 10 years ago. She saw the equity. She saw the neighborhood. She was so blinded by the asset that she didn't stop to think about why Charles, a seasoned real estate attorney, wasn't fighting her. She didn't ask the one question that would have saved her. Does the house have a clear title? Most people assume that because a 68-year-old woman has lived in a house for 40 years, the mortgage is paid off. And she was right. The original mortgage was paid off in 1995. But Jean didn't know about 2020. She didn't know about the time my best friend needed experimental surgery that insurance wouldn't cover, or about the large sum I moved into a protected annuity to ensure I would never be poor. She didn't know I had taken out a massive home equity line of credit, a HELOC against the house. The house was technically maxed out. I owed the bank nearly $450,000. If she had done a warranty deed, a title search would have revealed the lien. But a quitclaim skips the search. It assumes you know what you are buying. Mom, Christopher said, stepping closer. Please, don't let the lawyers scare you. This is for us. This is for your legacy. I looked at my son. He looked tired, but there was greed there too. He wanted the easy way out. He wanted the $1 million property without the work. I just want peace. I whispered. I don't want to fight anymore. Then sign, Jean urged, pushing the pen into my hand. Sign, and we take over. You won't have to worry about a thing. No bills, no maintenance, nothing. It becomes our responsibility. Your responsibility, I repeated. You promise? I promise, Jean said. We will take care of everything. I looked at Charles. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. He was witnessing that I was of sound mind. He was witnessing that I was not being coerced physically. He was letting them sign their own financial death warrant. I sat down. The paper felt cold under my hand. I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was signing away my home, the place I brought my baby home to, the place I mourned my husband. But it wasn't a home anymore. It was just wood and brick. My home was my dignity, and I was keeping that. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly. Bonnie Garrison. I dated it. Brenda, the notary, stamped it. Thump, thump. The sound echoed in the quiet room like a gavel. Done, Jean exhaled. It was a sound of pure ecstasy. She snatched the deed up and handed it to Brenda. File this immediately. I want it recorded with the county by noon. I'll head there now, Brenda said, packing up her bag. The room fell silent. The transfer was complete. Legally, the house was no longer mine. Legally, I was a guest. But legally, something else had just happened. The due-on-sale clause in my HELOC contract had just been triggered. Banks lend money to people, not houses. When the person they lent to no longer owns the house, they want their money back. Immediately, Jean was beaming. She looked around the dining room with a sense of ownership. Well, she said, that wasn't so hard, was it? Now we can start making some real decisions. She turned to me. Bonnie, we'll need to go through the garage this weekend. Christopher wants to set up a workshop, and there's just so much old stuff in there. I stood up slowly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the spare key ring, the one with the brass house key and the shed key. I held them out to her. "Here," I said. Jean looked at the keys, then at me. She smiled, a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. She took them from my palm. Her fingers were cold. "Thank you, Bonnie. It's for the best." "It's all yours now," I said, looking her dead in the eyes, dropping the act for just a split second. "Every brick, every board, every obligation." Jean frowned slightly. "Obligation? You mean the utilities? We told you we'll handle the electric bill." "Everything attached to this house is yours," I said. "You wanted the asset. You have the asset." "Right," she said, dismissing my tone as the ramblings of a sick woman. "Well, we should get going. We have a lot of calls to make. Painters, contractors." "Goodbye, Mom," Christopher said. He kissed my cheek, but it felt like a betrayal. "We'll come check on you Sunday." They walked out the door, the deed in hand, the keys in pocket. They walked out into the sunshine, thinking they had just inherited a fortune. I watched them go. Charles came up beside me and stood at the window. "They have no idea," Charles murmured. "The bank will get the notification of the title transfer within days. The demand letter will follow." "How long do they have?" I asked. "Usually 30 days to pay the balance in full," Charles said, "or the bank begins foreclosure proceedings." I watched their car pull away. I didn't feel sad. I felt a strange, quiet relief. They wanted to take care of me, I said, turning away from the window. Now, they have a $450,000 reason to think about me every single day. The trap was sprung. Now, all I had to do was wait for the snap. I moved out 3 days after signing the deed. I didn't wait for them to push me. I walked out on my own 2 feet. I found a garden apartment in a quiet complex about 20 minutes away. It wasn't grand. It had a small galley kitchen, a beige carpet that had seen better days, and a little patio just big enough for 2 chairs and a fern. But to me, it looked like a palace. Why? Because nobody was measuring the windows. Nobody was talking about knocking down walls. Nobody was looking at me like I was an expiration date. For the first time since the diagnosis, I slept through the night. The silence in that apartment was heavy, but it was a good kind of heavy. It was the weight of safety. I made my coffee in the morning, and I sat on my patio watching a cardinal hop along the fence. And I realized I wasn't just surviving. I was breathing again. I had left most of the furniture behind. Christopher and Jean had made it clear they considered my belongings clutter, so I let them have it. The heavy dining table, the china cabinet, the guest beds, I left it all. I took my clothes, my photos, my books, and the few small treasures I could carry in my car. I stripped my life down to the essentials, and I felt lighter for it. But while I was finding peace in simplicity, my son and his wife were drunk on excess. I still had friends in the old neighborhood. Margaret, who lived 2 doors down, called me a week after I left. She lowered her voice to a whisper, even though she was on the phone. "Bonnie, you wouldn't believe what is going on over there," she said. "There is a dumpster in the driveway the size of a school bus. They are gutting the place." I closed my eyes and pictured it. My kitchen. The yellow wallpaper I had picked out with my husband 30 years ago. The oak cabinets. Gone. They started at 7 a.m. on Saturday. Margaret continued. I saw Jean directing the contractors. She looks like she won the lottery. She practically had, or so she thought. From what I gathered over the next few weeks, Christopher and Jean weren't just redecorating. They were hemorrhaging money. They were spending their own savings, money they had likely been hoarding for years, to turn my traditional colonial home into a modern showpiece. They ordered a custom Italian range that cost more than my first car. They ripped up the hardwood floors to put in gray luxury vinyl plank because Jean read somewhere that it was in. They hired a landscaping crew to dig up my rose garden, my pride and joy, to make room for a swimming pool. A pool. In a house they didn't technically own yet. It was manic. It was the behavior of people who had never worked for what they had, so they didn't know the value of it. They looked at the house and saw a free asset worth $600,000. They figured if they put 50 or 100,000 of their own cash into it, they would bump the value up to $750,000. They saw themselves as brilliant real estate moguls. They were so busy spending money that they didn't pay attention to the mail. I knew this because Christopher called me once about 2 weeks in. He didn't call to ask how the apartment was. He called to complain about the mail forwarding. "Mom, we're still getting piles of your junk mail," he said, sounding annoyed. "Credit card offers, bank statements, charity requests. It's cluttering up the counter." "I set up the forwarding, Christopher," I said calmly. "It takes a few weeks to kick in. Just throw it out if it looks like junk." "Yeah, I've been tossing most of it," he said. "There was some stuff from the bank, but I figured it was just your old statements. We open a new account for the house bills anyway." My heart did a little flip. "That's fine," I said. "If it's addressed to me and it looks like a statement, just toss it. I have everything online now." I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, a small smile playing on my lips. He had thrown it out. He had thrown out the bank notices. You see, when a title transfers, the county recorder's office updates its public records. Banks subscribe to services that monitor these records. It's an automated system. The moment the deed changed from Bonnie Garrison to Christopher and Jean Garrison, a computer in a bank data center somewhere flagged the account. The first letter would have been polite, a notice of transfer, or an inquiry asking for clarification. The second letter would have been a notice of intent to accelerate. That's the scary one. That's the one that says, "We see you sold the house. Per the terms of the home equity line of credit, the full balance of $450,000 is now due." Christopher, in his arrogance, saw the bank's logo on the envelope and assumed it was for me. He assumed it was just his senile mother's old paperwork. He was so focused on picking out backsplash tile and arguing with pool contractors that he was throwing away the warnings that his world was about to collapse. I could imagine the pile on the kitchen counter. Swatches of fabric, paint chips, invoices for lumber, and buried underneath, the white envelopes from the bank, unopened, ignored, ticking like a time bomb. They were spending tens of thousands of dollars on a house that was already in the early stages of foreclosure. Every dollar they spent on that new kitchen was a dollar they were donating to the bank. Every check they wrote to a contractor was money they would never see again. It was almost tragic. If they had just been honest with me, if they had just waited, if they had treated me with an ounce of respect, I would have shown them the books. We could have worked something out. But they didn't want to work it out. They wanted to take it. I sat on my patio and sipped my tea. It was a beautiful afternoon. The air was crisp. I felt a deep, abiding sense of calm. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just waiting. I knew the timeline. The bank doesn't wait forever. If they were ignoring the letters, the next step wouldn't be a letter. It would be a process server or a sheriff. Jean was probably standing in my old kitchen right now, admiring her new quartz countertops, thinking she was the queen of the castle. She had no idea the castle was built on sand, and the tide was coming in fast. I took a sip of tea and closed my eyes. I could wait. I had played the long game this far. I could wait a few more days for the phone to ring. And I knew it would. When the reality finally hit them, the explosion would be loud enough to hear all the way over here in my quiet little garden apartment. They were celebrating their victory, but they didn't know the game wasn't over. In fact, It had only just begun. The silence from the big house lasted exactly 21 days. I know this because I marked every single day on my calendar with a small red X. 21 days of them tearing down walls, planting shrubs, and ignoring the mail. But on the 22nd day, the reality finally knocked on their door. It wasn't a knock they could ignore. It came in the form of a certified letter, the kind you have to sign for, the kind that doesn't get lost in a pile of tile samples. I was sitting in my kitchenette, eating a piece of toast, when my phone rang. It was Christopher. "Mom," he said. He wasn't yelling, which was worse. His voice sounded tight, like he was being strangled. "Mom, did you take out a loan? A big one?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Christopher, you have the house. You have the paperwork. Why are you asking me?" "Because there is a letter here from First National Bank," he said, his voice rising in panic. It says there is an acceleration of debt. It says the entire balance of $450,000 is due immediately because of an unauthorized transfer of title. "Mom, what is this?" "Read it to me," I said calmly. "It says notice of default and intent to foreclose." He choked out. "Mom, they're saying if we don't pay nearly $500,000 by the first of the month, they are taking the house. This has to be a mistake. You paid off the mortgage in the 90s. We saw the records." I paid off the original mortgage. I corrected him. But 5 years ago, I took out a home equity line of credit. I needed it for personal reasons and to secure my future. You owe $500,000? He sounded like he was going to be sick. "The house owes it, Christopher," I said. "And now that you own the house, you own the debt. That's how a quitclaim deed works. You take the asset, as is." "Didn't you read the fine print?" "But we didn't sign for this loan," he shouted. "We didn't borrow this money. This is fraud." "It's not fraud," I said, my voice steady. "It's property law. You wanted the deed. You pressured me for the deed. You got the deed. You just didn't bother to check if the deed came with a price tag." "I'm calling the bank," he snapped. "This is insane. I'm going to fix this. They can't just dump your debt on me." He hung up. I didn't call him back. I knew exactly how that conversation would go. I found out later from Charles, who heard it through the legal grapevine, that Christopher marched into the bank branch that afternoon. He was red-faced, slamming his fist on the desk, demanding to speak to the manager. He was arrogant. He thought he was the victim. He screamed about how he was the new owner, and he hadn't agreed to any of this. The bank manager, a calm woman named Mrs. Higgins, apparently just slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was the Helic agreement, highlighting the due-on-sale clause. She explained it to him slowly, like he was a child. "Mr. Garrison, when your mother transferred the title to you without our permission, she violated the terms of the loan. That violation triggers an immediate repayment. The security for the loan is the house. If the money isn't paid, we take the security. We foreclose." But I didn't know. Christopher had pleaded. "We put $50,000 into renovations. We're building a pool." "That is unfortunate," Mrs. Higgins replied. "But any improvements you make to the property will also be lost if the house is foreclosed upon. Unless you can write a check for $450,000 today, the process moves forward." He walked out of that bank, and his legs probably felt like jelly. But the day wasn't done with him yet. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. While Christopher was getting destroyed at the bank, Jean was at the house dealing with her own disaster. They had torn up the kitchen floor to put in that trendy gray vinyl. But when the contractors pulled up the old subfloor near the back wall, they stopped working. They called Jean over. The wood underneath wasn't just old, it was rotten. Black mold had been quietly eating away at the beams for years, caused by a slow leak behind the dishwasher that I had never noticed. The main support beam for the kitchen was compromised. Jean called Christopher while he was driving home from the bank. "Chris, you need to get here," she was crying. "The contractor says the whole back of the house is unstable. They have to stop the renovation. They say to fix the foundation and the mold, it's going to cost another $40,000. We can't afford this. We've already spent the savings on the pool deposit and the cabinets." Christopher pulled into the driveway of the house he thought was his gold mine. He looked at the half-dug hole in the backyard where the pool was supposed to go. He looked at the dumpster filled with my clutter. He looked at his wife, standing in the doorway of a kitchen that was now a construction zone with a rotting skeleton. They were trapped. They couldn't sell the house to pay off the debt because the house was now a construction site with foundation issues. No buyer would touch it. They couldn't take out a loan against the house to fix it because the bank already had a lien on it and was foreclosing. And they couldn't just walk away because they had already sunk nearly all their own liquid cash into the renovations. They had inherited a sinking ship, and instead of checking the hull, they had spent all their money painting the deck. That evening, I was watching a game show when my phone rang again. It was Jean. Her voice was different this time. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the "we're doing this for your own good" tone. She sounded small. "Bonnie," she sniffled, we have a problem. A big problem." "I know," I said. "Christopher says the bank wants all the money. And the house is broken, Bonnie. It has mold. It has foundation rot. Why didn't you tell us?" "I didn't know about the mold," I said honestly. "But Jean, even if I did, you never asked. You never got an inspection. You were so busy measuring for curtains, you never looked at the bones of the house." "We're going to lose it," she whispered. "We're going to lose the house. And we're going to lose the $50,000 we spent on the kitchen. We'll be broke." I listened to her cry. Part of me, the mother part, wanted to comfort her. But then I remembered the way she threw my bluebird into a trash bag. I remembered how she talked about my death like it was a business transaction. "You wanted the asset, Jean," I said softly. "You wanted to be in charge. This is what being in charge looks like. It's not just collecting the inheritance. It's paying the bills. Can you help us?" she begged. "You have that annuity, right? The lawyer mentioned an annuity. Can't you cash it out to save the house?" "That annuity is for my care," I said firmly. "That is for my medicine. That is for my food. I am not going to bankrupt my future to pay for your greed. You made this bed. You stripped the sheets. You threw out the pillows. And you chose the mattress. Now you have to lie in it." I hung up the phone. I sat there in the silence of my little apartment. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a heavy, finalized sense of justice. They had tried to steal my ending. They wanted to write the last chapter of my life for me, where I was the helpless victim and they were the heroes. But I had rewritten the script, and in my version, the villains didn't get away with the loot. They got caught holding the bag, and the bag was very, very heavy. I knew he was coming before he even knocked. A mother always knows when her child is in trouble, even when that child is a 40-year-old man who tried to swindle her. I could feel the storm brewing all day. The air in my apartment felt heavy, charged with the kind of electricity that comes before a lightning strike. It was a Tuesday evening, raining hard. I was sitting in my armchair with a book I hadn't actually read a page of in an hour. Then came the banging. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a desperate, angry pounding that rattled the frame of my front door. I didn't rush. I marked my page, set the book on the side table, and walked to the door. I checked the peephole. Christopher. He didn't look like the confident, arrogant man who had sat at my dining table 3 weeks ago demanding my checkbook. He looked like a ghost. His hair was plastered to his forehead from the rain, his shirt was untucked, and there were dark, bruised circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He looked desperate. I unlocked the door and opened it. You did this, he shouted before I could even say hello. He pushed past me into the small entryway, dripping water onto my carpet. You set us up. You knew. You knew the whole time. He was pacing my small living room like a caged animal, running his hands through his wet hair. The smell of stress and stale coffee radiated off him. Hello, Christopher, I said, closing the door quietly to keep the neighbors from hearing. You're letting the cold in. Don't give me that calm mother routine, he yelled, spinning around to face me. His eyes were wild. We are ruined, Mom. You hear me? Ruined. The bank sent the final notice today. They are starting foreclosure on Monday. Monday. And the contractor, the guy ripping up the kitchen, he's threatening to sue us for breach of contract because we can't pay him the second installment for the mold remediation. I walked past him to the kitchenette. I'm making tea, I said. Chamomile. You look like you need it. I don't want tea. He slammed his hand on my small laminate counter. I want to know why you did this to us. Why didn't you tell us about the debt? Why didn't you tell us the house was leveraged to the hilt? I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. I didn't turn around. I needed a moment to steady my hands. Seeing him like this, broken, panicked, furious, broke my heart a little. But then I remembered the way he had looked at his watch while I was crying about my diagnosis. I remembered how he had let his wife throw away my mother's bluebird. I turned to face him. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. I didn't tell you, Christopher, because you didn't ask. I said, you didn't ask about my finances. You didn't ask about the history of the house. You didn't ask for a title search. You just demanded the deed. We were trying to protect the asset, he argued, his voice cracking. We were trying to keep it in the family. No, I said, keeping my voice low and level. You were trying to secure your inheritance before I was even cold. You were afraid I would spend your money on my health. He stopped pacing. He looked at me, and for a second, the anger slipped, revealing the shame underneath. But he quickly covered it up with more defensive shouting. That's not fair. We were worried about you. Were you? I asked, when Jean was measuring for curtains while I was sitting right there. When you took my checkbook, when you brought a notary to my house to bypass my lawyer, was that worry, Christopher, or was that greed? He didn't answer. He just breathed heavily, his chest heaving. The kettle whistled. The sound was shrill in the small room. I took it off the heat and poured the water over 2 tea bags. I carried the mugs to the small bistro table by the window and sat down. Sit, I said. It wasn't a request. He hesitated, then slumped into the chair opposite me. He put his head in his hands. We're going to lose everything, he mumbled into his palms. The $50,000 we put into the renovation, it's gone. If the bank takes the house, we get nothing. We walk away with zero, less than zero, because we still owe the contractor. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Mom, you have to help us. The lawyer, Charles, he mentioned an annuity. He said you moved money into a protected account years ago. I took a sip of my tea. It was hot and soothing. I did. How much is in it? He asked. The hunger was back in his eyes, cutting through the panic. Enough, I said. Enough to pay for my treatments. Enough to ensure I never have to be a burden on anyone. You have to cash it out, he said urgently, leaning across the table. If you cash it out, we can pay off the HELOC. We can save the house. We can fix the mold. We can make this right. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw a man who had never been told no by me his entire life. I saw a man who thought that every mess he made was mine, to clean up. No, I said. He blinked, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. What? No, I repeated. I will not cash out my annuity. That money is legally untouchable. It is structured specifically for my long-term care. If I give it to you to bail you out of a bad real estate deal. What happens to me when I get sicker? Who pays for my nursing care then? You. He stammered. We would take care of you. You could move back in. Once the house is fixed. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Move back in? Into the guest room? While Jean complains that I'm taking up space. No, thank you. Mom, please. You can't let us drown. I set my mug down with a firm clink. Christopher, listen to me, I said, my voice hardening. You didn't want me. You wanted my assets. You rushed the process. You skipped the inspections. You bullied a sick woman because you thought she was weak. You got the house, Christopher. You won. You just forgot to check what the house owed. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The truth of it hung in the air between us. This isn't a trick, I continued. This is a lesson. You wanted to be the head of the household. You wanted to make the executive decisions. Well, this is what adulthood looks like. Sometimes you make a bad investment. Sometimes you buy a lemon, and you have to pay for it. You're my mother, he whispered, tears finally spilling over his lashes. How can you do this? Because I am your mother, I said softly, and I raised you to be better than this. I raised you to be honest. I raised you to value people over things. You forgot that. Maybe losing this house will help you remember. He sat there for a long time. The rain lashed against the window pane. Finally, he stood up. He didn't scream anymore. The fight had gone out of him. He looked like a deflated balloon. So that's it, he asked hoarsely. You're just going to let the bank take it. It's not my house anymore, I said, taking another sip of tea. It's yours. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob, looking back at me. He looked like a little boy again, waiting for me to fix his skin knee. But I stayed in my chair. Goodbye, Christopher, I said. He walked out into the rain. I locked the door behind him. I went back to my chair, picked up my book, and listened to the sound of the rain. I felt a profound sadness for him, but no guilt. None at all. I had saved myself, and in a way, by refusing to save him, I was giving him the only thing I had left to give, the truth. The foreclosure sign went up in the yard of my old house 3 weeks after that rainy night. It wasn't a small, polite sign. It was a large, glaring notice taped to the front window, declaring that the property was now in the possession of the bank. I didn't go to see it. I didn't need to. Margaret told me about it when she came to visit me for lunch. She told me how the neighbors whispered when the sheriff's deputies arrived to escort Christopher and Jean off the property. Apparently, they had tried to stay until the very last second, arguing with the officers, but the law is the law. They left with a U-Haul full of their clothes and their regrets. They lost everything because the house sold at auction for less than what was owed on the HELOC and the accumulated legal fees. There was no surplus. There was no check for the equity they thought they were stealing. The bank took the proceeds to cover the debt. The $50,000 Christopher and Jean had drained from their savings to pay for the quartz countertops and the pool excavation, gone. It was a donation to a house they would never live in. I heard through the grapevine that the financial strain broke them. Jean moved back in with her parents in Atlanta, and Christopher is renting a small studio apartment near his office. They are still married, technically, but I imagine it's hard to look at your spouse with love when every time you see them, you're reminded of the fortune you threw away. They haven't called me. I think the shame is too heavy. Or maybe they are still angry. It doesn't matter. For the first time in my life, their emotions are not my responsibility. As for me, a funny thing happened once the dust settled. Dr. Evans noticed it first. I went in for my 3-month checkup, expecting the usual grim news about my markers and inflammation levels. He ran the tests, and when he came back into the room, he was frowning at his clipboard. "Bonnie, have you changed your diet?" he asked. Have you started a new medication? No, I said. Why? Your blood pressure is down. Your inflammation markers have dropped significantly. You look vibrant. I smiled. I lost about 300 pounds of dead weight, doctor. That tends to help. It turns out that stress was the gasoline fueling my illness. Living in that big house, worrying about maintenance, worrying about being a burden, walking on eggshells around a son who saw me as an obstacle. It was killing me faster than the disease ever could. Now, my life is small, but it is huge. I wake up when I want. I drink my coffee on my patio, watching the squirrels. I joined a book club in my complex. I met a woman named Sarah who lives 2 doors down. She's 70, a retired teacher, and she loves gin rummy as much as I do. We play cards on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We laugh until our sides hurt. We don't talk about estate planning or resale value. We talk about life. I still have my annuity. It pays for my rent, my groceries, and my treatments. I am not rich, but I am comfortable. I don't have a formal dining room anymore, but I have a kitchen table where friends sit and actually listen to me. I don't have a guest room for family who never visits, but I have a sofa where I can nap in peace. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the bluebird Jean threw away. I miss it, but then I look around at my calm, quiet apartment, and I realize that losing that bluebird was the price of admission for this freedom. We spend so much of our lives accumulating things. We fill our attics with boxes and our bank accounts with numbers, thinking that this is what safety looks like. We think that if we have enough stuff, our children will respect us, and the world will value us. But my son didn't respect me because of my stuff. He coveted me because of it. The stuff was the poison. I am 68 years old. According to the actuaries, I'm in the twilight of my life. But I feel like it's morning. I have reclaimed my narrative. I am not the victim in a story about elder abuse. I am the heroine in a story about independence. If you are listening to this and you are holding on to things because you are afraid to let go, or if you are letting people treat you poorly because you are afraid to be alone, listen to me. The scariest thing isn't being alone. The scariest thing is being with people who make you feel alone. I sat down with Charles one last time to finalize my will. He asked if I wanted to leave anything to Christopher. I thought about it. I thought about the boy I raised and the man who stood in my kitchen demanding my dignity. Leave him the photo albums, I said, and leave him a letter. Tell him I forgive him, but tell him that his inheritance was the lesson I taught him in that rainy apartment. I hope he spends it wisely. I walked out of Charles's office into the bright Alabama sunshine. I got into my sensible sedan, drove to the grocery store, and bought a bouquet of tulips just because I liked the color. I drove home to my rented apartment, unlocked the door with my own key, and put the flowers in a vase. They looked beautiful. They looked like life. Don't let anyone rush you to your grave. If they want your life before you're done living it, let them have the burden, but keep the joy for yourself. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.